right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. Happy World Ocean Week to everyone. We've been having an incredible event series this week in partnership with the Explorers Club. In fact, I am in Manhattan, downtown New York, broadcasting live from the map room at the Explorers Club up on the 5th floor. The Explorers Club is an incredible series of live events at the club this week. So if you haven't checked out the Explorers Club, check out explorers.org. If you're in the neighborhood, you can come and check out some of these events in person, and I believe they're all being streamed online, many of them as well. If you are enjoying these classroom events, we've had some great theme days. Monday was deep sea. Tuesday was amazing marine life. Today is green ocean. So we are taking a look at the plants that are so important for the health of our ocean, for the health of our planet. We started the morning with seagrass. We're going to have a little mangrove action right now before we wrap up our green ocean segment, talking about kelp at 11 a.m. Eastern. So that's the site, exploringbytheseat.com/Ocean Week. You can find all the events there. Register, watch some of the old ones, tune in, see if you can grab a camera spot for some of the ones coming up. Of course, we were excited to see your classrooms. So we got Cheryl Doughty joining us today. She combines information about plants on the ground with imagery collected from drones, planes, and satellites. That's also called remote sensing. So she seeks to answer how and why mangrove ecosystems are changing. So looking right at individual plants and right out to the landscapes they are in across the world. She's a NASA Postdoctoral Program fellow at Goddard Space Flight Center, mapping where tropical mangroves meet temperate salt marshes. She wants to find out what's going on in this habitat. How is it changing? What's that doing to the way mangroves are storing carbon in our coastal ecosystems? I'm going to bring Cheryl in live with me right now. Hey, Cheryl, how you doing?
Hey, Joe. Hi, everyone. I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Cheryl, it's so great to see you. We have such a great group of classrooms with us today. Some of them are hanging out in camera spots backstage. Some are tuning in live via YouTube, and more will also tune in to the recording later today. So it's just great to have you. Great to have you representing the mangroves, and we'll let you take over for a little bit.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for having me. All right. You can see my screen, right?
We got you. Looks good.
All right. Perfect. Well, hello again, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. My name is Cheryl Doughty, and I'm a scientist at NASA, and I study how plants are changing in today's world using pictures taken from satellites. And it's really the things that I learned and loved as a kid your age that shaped my interest and really got me where I am today. So I hope you all find this interesting today. And the plants that I'm really excited to talk to you about, of course, for World Ocean Week are mangroves. So what are mangroves? Well, they're a special type of tree that live in the coastal intertidal zone. And there are lots of different types, way more than the 4 scenes I could fit on this slide for you today. And so across the world, there are about 80 different species or types of mangroves. And so they come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. And across the world, they live along coastlines. They really like warm temperatures, so they are most important coastal ecosystems in tropical areas. And salt marshes and seagrass meadows also like to live along coasts with mangroves, and I'm sure you've learned about them through Explore by the Seat of Your Pants this week. But they exist with mangroves along these coastlines throughout the world, and they typically like colder areas of the world. But together, they all form these incredibly beautiful green ocean systems. And so mangroves, they need to live along coastlines because they actually like ocean salt water. But coastal life in these areas can be hard, so they've adapted special features that have allowed them to live by the sea. So they have special leaves, seeds, and roots that actually help them live there. They have waxy leaves that help keep fresh water in, and they have special leaves that actually spit salt out. So when they take up salt water from their roots and process it, they end up spitting out salt through their leaves. So this is a special adaptation they have that allows them to live in the coastal intertidal. They also have special seeds that we call propagules, and these are designed to float in the seawater and they're ready to grow as soon as they find suitable habitat. And then last, mangroves are especially known for their special roots. So they have a few different kinds, like the prop roots that look like stilts and actually raise the trees out of the water. They also have special roots called pencil roots or pneumatophores that stick up out of the ground, and when they get inundated by the tide, they help the mangroves breathe by getting oxygen. And they also have special buttress roots and knee roots that do all of these things and also help stabilize the soils beneath them. So mangroves are pretty unique, and this is also why they are so important. They're important to lots of people all around the world, and people love them for the food they provide, for shelter and materials they provide, for the habitats they create, and just for some plain old fun. So here you can see people actually kayaking through the mangroves. So all of these things that mangroves do and provide for people, we actually call ecosystem services. So ecosystem services is a term for the benefits that people derive from systems like mangroves. And so mangroves are important to millions of people across the world, and the services they provide are actually worth some money too. So that's pretty cool. And one very important thing that mangroves do is actually store carbon. So mangroves are a blue carbon ecosystem. So what is blue carbon? Blue carbon is all about the carbon that's stored in coastal and marine ecosystems. So how do mangroves actually do this? Well, they create their own carbon through photosynthesis, and they store that carbon in their roots and their stems and their leaves. They also build up carbon stores in the soils beneath them, and they do that through accumulating dead plant matter as they grow and from the sediments that get brought into the mangrove soils. And the other important thing about blue carbon systems that are, again, at that interface of terrestrial land and the ocean is they can trap carbon that's flowing from one system to another by actually slowing down the water and dropping out that particulate matter. And all that particulate matter that drops out gets, again, built up and trapped in the soils beneath them. So these are a couple ways that mangroves actually collect carbon, and it's why there's such important blue carbon ecosystems. And so blue carbon is a really hot topic right now because of climate change, and it's something very important to NASA. So again, I work at NASA. I'm a postdoc there. And one of NASA's main goals is to understand how and why our Earth is changing. So NASA's developed lots of satellites and sensors that are always orbiting the Earth, and they're collecting information that tell us about Earth's surfaces and processes. So there's a lot going on in this graphic, but some of these have helped us map and monitor different aspects of mangroves across the world that are important to our understanding of blue carbon and how mangroves are changing. And so next, I'll show you what some of this data actually looks like and what it can help tell us. So we can use high-res imagery to map mangrove areas across the world. And so here is a satellite image similar to any picture you would take with a camera or your cell phone. And this image is from Florida with a big mangrove patch right in the middle there. And it's between the open ocean and people's homes. So this is a mangrove patch that's really important to the people of Florida. And this image is a little bit special. It has data in it that if we can manipulate it a little bit, we can change how we're actually viewing the surface of the Earth. And so in this representation of that image, what you can begin to pick out in these little red dots within the mangroves now are actual individual mangrove trees. So using this really high resolution information, we can look at individual trees. And so don't forget that this image is from space. So we're essentially measuring a single tree from space, which I think is pretty amazing. Now, if we collect this information over time using satellites that have been in orbit since the 1970s, we can begin to understand how mangroves have been changing over time from year to year with all of the imagery that we collect every year. And so here in these images, you can see work that a NASA intern has done, someone who was actually a high school student, so not too many years off from where you guys are in school. This could be your futures. But she's done some work that has actually mapped where mangroves have changed all across the world using these long-term satellite imagery data sets. And she's able to detect the types of changes that are happening in mangroves and what is actually causing them. And so here in these images, you can see the different colors that represent mangroves that have been lost due to erosion, due to removal by human, or mangroves that have been lost due to coastal storm events. And again, we can use this data to measure changes in mangroves all across the world. So we can also measure mangrove forest height and structure from space using special lasers. And so NASA is developing special sensors that can tell us about the height and structure of many different vegetation types, but also mangroves. And so here is an example from a special laser we call JEDI. And so it allows us to measure vegetation height. So each of the little lines that you see in this image, they're actually a laser pulse that the sensor sends down to the surface of the Earth, and it tells you the height of the vegetation. So with this image over Florida, the lower or darker brown pulses of light, they correspond to shorter plants, whereas the lighter colors correspond to taller plants. So what you're seeing is essentially the heights of all the vegetation across Florida. So again, this is pretty amazing to be measuring from space, and we can do this all across the world. So we can use this information to measure mangrove structures. And we can also measure mangrove structures from the ground. So this is another type of specialized laser called a terrestrial laser scanner. And what we do is take this into a mangrove and use this laser to measure the structure of the forest around us. So here, let's take a little fly through of the data that we can get from some of these lasers scanning the Earth. So now we're within the forest, standing on the forest floor, taking a spin around, and soon we're going to be walking backwards through the mangroves, and you get an idea of the 3D structure of these mangroves. And this is data that otherwise would be really difficult to collect for an area this big. But it gives you a really, really cool set of information about what these mangroves actually look like without us having to go in and measure each of those trees individually ourselves. So together, it's really all of this amazing data that helps us collect information about mangroves using special sensors and cameras from space that gives us a better understanding of mangroves' extents, mangrove structure, and changes to mangroves across the world. And together, these give us a picture of amazing mangroves and their importance as blue carbon ecosystems. And so that is actually all that I put together for you guys today, but I hope that you have lots of questions for me.
All right, Cheryl, very cool. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So many things jumped out there. One being that mangroves are incredible ecosystems. They're so important. Like so many other ecosystems and species, they do so many things for us for free that we could never replace. We could never do on our own. From carbon storage to protecting coastal ecosystems from erosion and storms to nurseries for fish, mangrove ecosystems are so important. Of course, coral is too. All right. And what I love too is NASA. I think a lot of times we think of NASA, we think of space, we think of leaving the planet, but actually NASA has eyes above, looking down at our planet and analyzing it constantly to see how it's changing and what we need to be paying attention to.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. People hear NASA and they think space exploration, but NASA is also doing a lot in terms of what they call Earth observation. So they're doing a lot to just observe Earth and all the changes that are happening here.
All right. Well, we promised a Kahoot quiz, put the students against each other with their mangrove knowledge, and we're going to get that going right now. I'm going to pop up the code here, or not the code, but the website. So if you head to Kahoot.it, it's going to ask you for a PIN number. I'm going to share that with you very, very shortly, and then you can make your way in. Now, if you have one-to-one technology at your desks, that's awesome. You can log in right there. If not, no worries. You can have your teacher put up at the front. You can shout out your answers. We'll get you in there one way or another. So let's get this screen share going and let's play some Kahoot. All right, there we go. So here is our PIN number. We'll give a minute or two to get our students in. It is 225-3102. Or if you've got your handheld device, maybe a tablet, maybe your phone, you can scan that QR code next to the code number, and that'll bring you right into the event. We're going to have 4 questions today, a little bit of true and false, a little bit of multiple choice. You get the answer right, you're getting points. You get it right and you do it quick, you're going to get even more points. If you get it wrong, even if you're so fast and you get that wrong answer in, we got nothing for you. You need that right answer. You need it as quick as you can, and we'll be able to follow along and see where our classes end up, see who comes out on top. Classes and students are getting individual names. We've got Flying Iguana, Charming Panda, the Power Eagle, the Joyful Goose, the Gentle Goat, many, many more joining us here. So let's give it just a couple more seconds, get a few classes listed in here, get a few individual students listed in here, and then let's take that challenge. Let's see who comes out on top on the Mangrove Challenge. All right, let's get things going. 3 seconds to go, and then we are going to be right into the action. All right, question 1. What ocean zone are mangroves found in? Was it the mesopelagic? Was it the intertidal? Was it the deep sea? Or was it right out in the open ocean? What zone were the mangroves found in? You got 5 more seconds to lock in an answer. All right, good job, crew. Most went with that intertidal zone, where sometimes their roots are submerged, sometimes they are not. And we learned about the seagrass this morning, where pretty much most of the time the seagrass is submerged, sometimes really close to shore. It might be out of the water for a little bit. The diplomat rabbit is in first place, but only by a point. So let's see what happens in our next question. Mangroves have an adaptation to spit out salt from their leaves. Is that true or is that false? Mangroves have an adaptation to spit out salt from their leaves. Oh, wow. Couldn't fool anyone on that one. Everybody went true. Very cool. Let's see what happens here. The Giving Raven is taking that top spot. Let's slide over and let's take in another question here. About how many species of mangrove are there? How many species around the world? Is it about 10, about 25, maybe about 50, or was it as high as maybe around 80? All right, good stuff. Most went with 80. Cheryl, do you think there's more species to be found?
That's a really good question. You know, unlike insects and microbes, I think we've found most of the mangrove species there are in the world. The coastal areas are pretty well explored.
All right. Lots of movement. The creative dove has taken the lead. One more question. This is could potentially steal the big win. NASA is only interested in studying space, not looking back at our planet. Is that true or is that false? All right, good stuff. Absolutely false. We learned today NASA is looking at all kinds of things. And Cheryl, it's so cool to see how that technology, even from space, lasers and camera systems, can give us such detailed pictures of change over time on our planet.
Isn't it cool? It's all part of NASA's job to design these sensors and get this data that we need to understand our world.
All right. Our podium is looking like this. In third place, we have the purple octopus. In our second spot, we've got the shining crab. And who is taking our top spot in the mangroves? The power raccoon sneaking in at the end. All right, good stuff. And there we go. I think those are all species you could find in the mangroves. Cheryl, what do you think?
You're probably not wrong.
All right, very cool. Let's come back from that screen share and let's switch gears. Let's do a little Q&A action. If you are tuning in via YouTube, now is a great time to introduce your class, put in some questions for us. We'll also visit our camera classes. In fact, let's get one started right here in Arthur, grade 2. They're wondering carbon or the mangroves, if they're knocked down, whether by storms or humans clearing them, what happens to that carbon?
Well, that is such a good question. Sometimes that happens in nature, right? Trees grow, they fall down, a storm comes like a hurricane, it knocks them all down. And so that's all part of the process of cycling carbon in the mangrove ecosystem. So when a tree falls down, it becomes part of that soil over time. So again, all that dead plant matter, it kind of gets built up in the mangrove soils.
All right. Let's jump to another classroom here. Let's bring in a camera crew. That's why I'm in the wrong one. There we go. We're going to go to Miss Robinson's crew. They are in Petawawa, Ontario, grade 7s in Canada. Let's bring them front and center.
There you go.
Oh. Hey, grade 7s.
What would happen if mangroves went extinct?
Ooh, well, if mangroves went extinct, we would lose all of those mangrove areas. And when we lose those mangrove areas, we're losing all those ecosystem services they provide us too. So sea level rise is something happening with climate change, and it's something that threatens the future of mangroves. So it's something to keep an eye out in the future in terms of whether or not they go extinct.
Awesome. Thank you. We have another question, if that's okay.
Go for it.
Go ahead, Justin.
How big can mangroves be?
Well, there was a recent study by NASA. One of the sensors that we've developed is actually to measure heights of trees, right? And so they found the tallest mangrove, I think, is about 60 meters tall, and that is in Nigeria.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was another tree that they found. They found that through NASA, and they had to go basically and see in real life if that tree was as tall as they predicted with the satellite sensor. So
That's awesome.
really, yeah, good question.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Petawawa. Mangrove ecosystems are so cool. I love snorkeling in them. All that root structure, there's so much to be found there. Baby sharks, crabs, all kinds of creatures. They're such important nursery habitats. Heck, even in Costa Rica, you can find sloths moving through mangroves and even taking a little swim to get to a different spot. They're just such cool ecosystems.
Right.
All right, let's go to another camera classroom. Let's go to New York this time. 5th graders hanging out with us. Let's bring them front and center. Miss Cottrell's crew. Hey, 5th grade.
So in school, we've been learning about how the world is running out of fresh water and it's hard to find. So do you know if people or scientists can duplicate what the mangrove trees can do and separate salt from the water to give people more fresh water?
That's a really interesting question, and that might be a little bit outside of my knowledge, but I know that I think we're working on, in general, understanding the water cycle throughout the world and how mangroves can be important in doing that. But in terms of actually using those similar mechanisms to make more fresh water, I'm not sure, but I'm sure there's some scientists that are working on that. It's a really good question.
That was a great question. Yeah, very cool. I love biomimicry, when we can, take from nature to help us build anything from bullet trains to, well, I don't know why bullets is coming to my mind, but bulletproof vest is another really good one, from spider silk, weaving Kevlar. It's so cool how nature perfects things, and we can kind of steal that engineering. We can use some of that to our benefit. Ms. Cottrell's crew, we're going to come back your way shortly. Let's go to YouTube and see what we have here. Grade 4s in Toronto with Miss Mello's crew want to know, how did you start your job?
Well, that's another really good question. I've been doing a lot of school. So I started studying mangroves when I was doing my master's work, and I was studying the mangroves in Florida. And in Florida, mangroves are expanding because of a warming climate. And so there's a lot of interest from NASA, and especially the NASA Kennedy Space Center in Florida, in understanding how mangroves and the surrounding wetlands can protect them. So basically, with all of these interesting science questions we need to get funding to research these questions. So that kind of describes the process of the science. And for me, getting into that science, it was all about school. So after school that you guys go through, going through high school, I went to an undergraduate program in biology. Then in my master's program, I studied mangroves and ecology. And then for my PhD, I studied remote sensing. So actually using all of these satellite sensors and images to answer cool questions about mangroves on the ground. So the answer is a lot of school.
All right. So they had a follow-up question here, and they're curious about, those sensors looking down at mangroves, finding things like height. Why is it important for us to know things like that, like the height of mangroves?
Well, I didn't get to explain this all that well, but if you think about a short tree versus a tall tree is probably storing more carbon. So it's all about the structures of the mangroves that can help us calculate how much carbon is actually stored in it. So when we measure mangroves from space using pictures or lasers, what we're actually getting is information about the area or the structure, which we then use to calculate carbon. And so it's measurements like height that tell us more about the carbon.
All right, very cool. Let's go back to our camera classrooms, because I bet there's some questions waiting for us. This time, we're going to go to Miss Riddle's crew. They are in Peterborough. Looks like they are a bit of a split group. Some grade 2s, 3s, and 4s hanging out there. Let's bring them in so they can ask a question. All right, Madame Riddle's crew, we're ready for you.
Yeah, we had a few questions that I posted in the chat. You might want to just pick one of them, but we have what kind of animals live in and around mangroves? Mm-hmm. If they fall down, how long do they take to grow back? And can you eat them?
That's such a good question. Well, there are so many different types of animals that live in mangroves. I could spend the next hour listing all of them. And Joe mentioned a couple too. But there are lots of fishes that live in mangroves. On their roots, we get things like oysters that like to settle on their roots and actually live there. And then there are also mammals. So things like the sloths and proboscis monkeys in tropical places in the world that actually live in mangroves. And of course, there's lots of different bird species. There's crabs. So if it lives along the coast, it's probably taking advantage of the awesome habitat that mangroves have created. And then in terms of what you can eat, mangroves create lots of other things, right? So I'm not too sure if you can directly eat mangroves themselves, but I know some mangroves, they produce fruits that are edible. From mangrove flowers, people actually produce honey. So I know if you go down to Florida, you can probably buy mangrove honey from a farmer's stand. So that's one of the cool things from mangroves that you can eat. And then in terms of them growing back after they fall down, well, there's a lot of science that's actually still studying this. I know in Florida, after a hurricane 5 years ago, we're still seeing mangroves just slowly kind of coming back from being knocked down. So it can take a while for these forests to regrow, which is why I love saying that it's better to keep the intact mangrove forests that we have and not to lose them, because it does take a long time for them to grow back.
All right. Wow. That's a solid series of questions. And, even kind of indirectly food-wise, beautiful nurseries, safe environments for fish in and amongst those roots. And then they head back out into the water as they grow bigger. And then, we know that many people around the world depend on fish as a really important protein, a really important part of their diet. Okay, we need to go to Massachusetts. We have some third graders at Powder Mill School. How are we doing, everyone?
Can they grow in
Hi, we're good. How are you?
Can
Good.
they grow in fresh water?
Well, that is a good question. So mangroves are adapted to deal with salt water, but they can live in fresh water too. And just recently, some scientists found an inland, just freshwater patch of mangroves, I think somewhere in Brazil. And so they're disconnected, they're far from the ocean, and they've been surviving for, I think, thousands of years. So they can grow in fresh water. But I do think they like the coastal ocean where there's some salt water too.
I think I see someone else there with a question. You have another question? There we go.
Can you plant mangrove trees?
You can actually, and that's something that a lot of what we call restoration efforts are doing across the world. So in restoration, what we're trying to do is restore or bring back mangrove forests that we've lost. And so people will actually take those mangrove seeds that I showed you, or those propagules, and they'll plant them. And so with any luck, those mangroves take hold and they'll grow. So they can be planted.
Thank you so much.
All right. We'll come back your way. There might be time to get another one in there. Okay, so we visited our camera classrooms. Let's see if there's another bit of action here on YouTube. Okay, so career possibilities. So at somewhere like Goddard Space Flight Center, we learned a little bit about your job. What's another example or two of other jobs in this kind of space, maybe remote sensing space?
Well, there's lots of work to be done, lots of science to be done. So if you're like me and you're interested in research in terms of science, you can work at a place like NASA, or you can become a professor and work at a university and pursue research questions. But in relation to all of these studies and what we've been kind of talking about today, which is essentially climate change, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of protecting these ecosystems into the future, understanding how they can help us mitigate the impacts of things like climate change. So there are a lot of jobs to be had. So whether you're interested in research or conservation or even restoring or planting mangroves, there is a lot of work to be done.
All right, good stuff. I think sometimes you hear people say there's nothing left to explore, discover, but I don't think that could be further from the truth. There's so much we don't know. And I bet when you go out in the field, you might go out with 2 or 3 questions and come back with dozens more.
It's very true.
All right. Awesome stuff. Great questions from our kids today. Camera classrooms, give me a wave if we need to come back your way. If you have another question you'd like to work in. Oh, I'm being flagged down in New York. Let's bring them back in.
My question is are other plants and trees depending on the mangroves or anything?
That is such a good question. So in one of the slides I showed you, I also mentioned seagrasses and salt marshes, right? So these are all really important blue carbon ecosystems, and they all exist along the world's coastlines. And so you have to think about these ecosystems together too. So mangroves and salt marshes and seagrass meadows and even coral reefs, they form this really cool network of ecosystems along our coastlines. And they all work together and they all need each other to be healthy. So there's lots of different ways in which they kind of interact with and support one another. So it's important to keep them all healthy.
All right, good question. Miss Robinson's crew, let's bring our grade 7s back in.
There you go.
How much carbon can a mangrove absorb at one time?
Ooh, that is a really good question. And I don't think I can answer that off the top of my head, actually. But one of the things that we do measure over time with the changing extent of mangroves, we can predict how much carbon they're able to sequester over time using those estimates of area changes, basically. So that can give us an estimate of how much carbon can be stored through mangroves.
Awesome.
All right. And like you mentioned before as well, the size of that plant is going to determine how much it's storing there as well.
True.
All right. Is that someone else coming up?
Yes.
Stripy shirt? All right. Go for it.
Hi. I was wondering if it would be possible to transplant a mangrove tree, like to somewhere like Canada.
That's another really good question. And you're not the first person to ask that because people have done that. So we mentioned planting mangroves before.
Right.
We can take those mangrove seedlings, and people have tried to plant them in non-tropical areas, basically. So one example I'm thinking of is Southern California. So there was a professor at UC San Diego that also had an interest in mangroves, and they planted some mangrove seeds in a salt marsh in Southern California, and they did grow. And now I think they're working to get rid of them still. But yeah, so people can definitely move and replant mangroves across the world. Now, Canada might be a little bit too cold for the mangroves to survive because mangroves like warm temperatures,
Right.
but it's possible for them to be moved around the world.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Good questions. Sliding back to YouTube, Cole in grade 5 wants to know, we know our sea levels are rising. So what does that mean for mangroves? Can they grow a little taller? Do you think that's possible? Or as the sea rises, are they going to be in trouble?
That is another great question. And there is a lot of science going on that's interested in those questions. And what the science is finding is that compared to other blue carbon ecosystems like salt marshes and seagrasses, the mangroves are really good at growing and capturing carbon. But instead of growing taller to keep their heads above water, essentially, what they're doing is actually building the soil beneath them, so they're raising the land. So that's how mangroves, we hope, are going to be able to keep up with sea level rise. So there's lots of different factors that play into their ability to build that land. But when everything goes well, they're able to do that and keep up with sea level rise.
All right. We could probably squeeze in maybe one or two more questions. So any of our camera classes we haven't been to, Madame Riddle's class, or our third graders in Massachusetts, if you have another question, feel free to give me a wave. And maybe we'll take one here from YouTube. So Ms. Donovan's class, and they're wondering, what's NASA thinking right now with mangroves? I'm sure the data is showing that they're disappearing from places. So is there a worry that we're going to lose that ecosystem?
Yeah, so one of the things we're doing is monitoring their extents, and part of that is being able to identify where they're being lost. So they are being lost across the world. But what we're also interested in is using mangroves for sustainable development goals. So how can mangroves be incorporated into our plans for the future so that we can protect mangroves and benefit from all those ecosystem services they provide? And how can mangroves really help us kind of mitigate those negative impacts of future climate change? So that's kind of where NASA's interested in. So they're looking to the future.
All right. I see a big crew gathered around in Massachusetts. Let's see what's going on there.
What can we do to help mangroves grow?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, I mean, I think a lot of the mangroves that we know of, they are protected. And some of the mangroves that are more in danger or at risk, they are at risk from direct human uses. So in some parts of the world, mangroves are being cut down. But what can we do, I think, is just be aware of how important mangroves are and try to protect all of the natural ecosystems that we love so that we can continue to get these benefits from them.
All right. Awesome stuff. Good question.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. We are going to grab one more. Madame Riddle sent me one in the chat here. So let's pop that in. Mangrove trees. About how old can they be?
That is another good question. I mean, mangrove soils, I know, can be thousands of years old. So some of the mangroves that exist today, they've been living along coastlines and adapting to the conditions there for thousands of years. So I am not 100% sure what the oldest mangrove tree is, but I am definitely going to look that up.
I'm sure it varies too, depending on species and such. And I wonder too if we can count the rings like we can with most other trees.
That's actually something we can't do with mangroves. Yeah, so because they're such unique trees and the way they're adapted to live in salt water, they don't produce rings like terrestrial tree species do. So we can't count rings in mangroves.
There we go.
Yeah, right.
All right. Well, I think we should start off here with a huge shout out to all of our classrooms. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much for all the great questions, sending them in the chat, asking them live in camera spots, and of course, playing Kahoot with us. That's always a ton of fun. A shout out to the Explorers Club for helping us put this week on, letting us use this space at the club as well. If you visit explorers.org, was a whole series of events this week. There's 2 more days of events here at the club. If you're close enough to get down here, come and join us. There's all kinds of stuff going on today, including a mangrove panel later today at 4 o'clock. So you can also check out some of the sessions online live as well. So definitely check that out and visit there. Check out all the events that we still have coming up this week, exploringbytheseat.com. We have one more green ocean event. We're going to be talking kelp in about 15 minutes with Josie. And then Brian Scarry, National Geographic photographer, is going to join us at 1. And we're going to go into the world of whales. He's been working on projects around the world, video and pictures, just amazing stuff. So you don't want to miss that at 1 p.m. Eastern. Cheryl, thank you so much for an awesome session, for showing us why mangroves are so important and how we're using technology to understand them better than we've ever been able to.
Well, thanks so much, Joe, for the opportunity to share. And thanks to all of you. Keep learning.
All right. Let's bring in a few of those classrooms because there's a couple still hanging out backstage with us. Let's get a big goodbye and thank you with those groups. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. We hope to see you Thursday, Friday. Have a great week.